Tennessee football hasn't accomplished anything in a long, long time, but there is hope that 2022 is different, that Josh Heupel has this thing going, and there's a lot of evidence that that could be true after a fun, up and down, exciting 2021 season. We got Joe Hunk on the line. You can catch him all over the place. Let's see, 3HL. He's got his two podcasts, Strike Zone and Gamer Zone. Good stuff right there at 1045 The Zone. Joe, how you doing?
I am doing great. No, you are very accurate in everywhere between 3HL every single Monday through Friday between 3 and 6, and then the Strike Zone, which we do every single Thursday night from First Horizon Park, which is the home of the Nashville Sounds. And the Gamer Zone is very busy during football season because we use the Gamer Zone to actually preview what game is coming up for the Tennessee Titans. And I never knew at how fired up people could get about a preview using Madden in 22 and Madden 21. But trust me, if I lose a game in Madden, I hear about it for the entire week. So it is something that I actually have to take a lot more seriously than I thought I was going to have to when we first started it.
Well, Joe, Josh Heupel seems to be taking things seriously, although it's a fun offense to watch. That was where all the success was last year. Before we get to that, June was a hot recruiting month across the nation for everyone. Just your thoughts about what kind of progress Tennessee made. June 27th is the dead period, so they've had to work and get some work in and then try to get some commits and move on.
Well, and look, the recruiting hotbed is kind of fun when it comes to the state of Tennessee, because a lot of people want to make a big deal about how Tennessee only finished, in the top 25 as far as like number 24 overall. They brought some pieces in when it comes to the recruiting as far as transfer portal is concerned, which, let's be honest, everybody's trying to figure that out right now. But it's very unique that we have had so much hype around next year's class than we have actually this year's class. And yes, NIL is going to play a huge part in that because of the fact that, now with the way the NIL is structured, you do have these collectives that have the ability to raise money that they're going to be able to pay a lot of these college athletes. We've heard the potential amount of money, or the potential amount of money that a particular quarterback that is considered the best in the country may or may not be getting to come to Knoxville. And it's so unique because there's still a 2022 season that is going to be coming up. And Mark, I'll tell you, man, you have to kind of remind yourself of that because of how well Tennessee has recruited as far as the big name players for the 2023 class, that a lot of fans now are already excited about something that's over 400 days away, when we haven't even gotten to this football season yet, which this Tennessee team is actually going to be a very solid football team, at least offensively, coming into it. I think with Tennessee and the fact that they're in the top 15 is that because, look, you're still talking about a class that can change drastically over the course of the next few months, because you're going to get into that December signing day, which has now basically become the national signing day. We don't really celebrate February anymore the way that we used to. But when you're looking at the amount of 4 stars that are coming in, you do have the 5-star quarterback that's coming in from Long Beach State. And look, this is a clash right now that is something that Tennessee has not seen in a few years. And I think that a lot of people with Josh Heupel knew that the road was going to be extremely bumpy. They've went through a couple of coaches. They've had to see everything that's going on. They've went through a couple of athletic directors. They had a ton of drama when it came to trying to hire a new head coach, when it became, Jeremy Pruitt. And then after the Jeremy Pruitt debacle, you then had, UCF's athletic director comes in. And then after he comes in, he just brings in UCF's head coach. And you're thinking, well, this is okay. You just did this. I don't care how much money you spent on a coaching search. This is what you brought us, is we spent this on this, and you just basically went to the guy that you just worked with. So there were a lot of questions coming in with Josh Heupel, and the fact that you had the situations that arose last year, positive and negative, where you had the positives of discovering somebody like a Hendon Hooker and what he was able to do after the rough start that Joe Milton had. And then you have the negatives of what happened during the Ole Miss game and the golf ball and the orange, the mustard bottles and all these other things that got thrown into it, and the way that the season ended. So the unique part about it is, yes, the class right now is quote unquote only 15th, but the good part about it is they're adding pieces where they're needing to, because last season Tennessee was struggling when it came to getting sacks. They were struggling even on the other side of the football when stopping other teams from getting sacks. The quarterback position has been up and down periodically as far as depth is concerned, because when you're playing in the SEC, your quarterback and possibly any other member of your offensive team isn't going to be out there for every single play because somebody is going to get hurt. We saw that a lot with their offensive line last season. And to be able to build this depth, and I think that's going to be the biggest part about this, is even bringing in somebody like Ethan Davis, who's a tight end right now for the Tennessee Vols. It is a hard commitment for them at the moment. Yes, he's a 4-star that people like, but at the same time, the depth at the tight end position is something that is going to be extremely important when you come to the growth of this program.
Was Hendon Hooker just a complete find? He had a nice season at Virginia Tech a couple of years ago, but my goodness, I still think after 31 touchdowns and 3 picks and the way he directed this offense, he's still one of the most underrated players at his position in college football. And I'm going to name him basically based on the feedback I get and what I hear and don't hear, the most underrated quarterback in college football.
I wouldn't disagree with that. And I think that a lot of people use the fact that he didn't win the starting job right out of fall practice against him. And Joe Milton was the one that came out and started the season with this. And I know that you can look at Tennessee's record and you can look at it either positively as far as the growth that the team had, as far as the atmosphere getting better in the locker rooms, the atmosphere just around Knoxville itself improving, and the excitement that the fan base was starting to have, making it to the Music City Bowl, even though that game ended in a way that I think a lot of Tennessee fans are still angry about. But the other part about Hendon Hooker is once he finally became the starting quarterback of the Tennessee football team, you looked at the end of the season and wished that he would have been there from the very beginning. Yes, the Pittsburgh game is something that's going to get brought up a lot because that was a Joe Milton game. Hooker couldn't do much at the end of the Ole Miss game because he was the one that got hurt, and Joe Milton had to come in to try to go with that final drive to try to win that game for them. But this is a program that now you have a guy behind you that you have a lot of confidence in, not just because you believe that he's a good quarterback when throwing the football and being very accurate. It's also that he is extremely smart when it comes to not making the bad passes and making the turnover that has hurt Tennessee in the past. That is going to benefit them going into this season. And I think that's part of the reason why this program has so much excitement around it going into the fall, is because of, hey, you get Hendon Hooker for an entire season and the numbers this offense put up last year, not to mention the fact that hopefully your offensive line is going to be better where Hooker isn't running for his life for a lot of times. And this is the makings of potentially a really good offense in the SEC.
Yeah, so Joe, a lot of people didn't watch Tennessee last year, haven't watched Tennessee. I'm talking across the nation for years and years and years because they've just been out of it, but started to hear some good things and see the big scores and the big scoring outputs. And then a lot of people watched that Purdue bowl game. That was one of the highest ranked bowl games in terms of TV ratings other than the big ones. So people are starting to get excited about Tennessee football and intrigued about could they be back. Other players on either side of the ball that you're just excited about that could break out this year?
For me personally, when I'm looking at the offense, I do want to see what Brew McCoy is going to bring from USC. The fact that he transferred in, he was part of that transfer portal class, and it's very unique going into the offseason because you talked about it, and a lot of people's like, Tennessee was, top 25 in recruiting, but they got a few pieces when it comes to their offense. They didn't get much added when it comes to their signing class. But the part that I'm really excited about is how smart Tennessee was with this recruiting class in bringing in somebody like a Brew McCoy, because yes, Cedric Tillman is going to be your WR1. He's going to be your go-to guy, but you still need to find that person that's going to help you replace Velus Jones in this. And there's a lot of pieces on this team, whether it's Jalen Hyatt that's going to be coming in, that says during the offseason and even during spring practice, he talked a lot about the fact that his game is improving. And I know a lot of that is going to be coach speak, and a lot of this we're not going to know about until Tennessee travels to Pittsburgh to see, because I'm not going to use Ball State as a real measuring stick from this. But for me, it is going to be the growth of this running game as well with the Jabari Small, and seeing how well he's going to continue to grow as a running back in the kind of switchblade type of way that he has the ability, or I should say a Swiss Army knife, not a switchblade, but a Swiss Army knife, in his ability to catch the football out of the backfield as well as be able to run the football in between the tackles. Those are some things about him that I find to be very interesting. And still, you do have a Tennessee team that defensively, it's not that I'm excited about them. I just want to see them do better. I want to see them be able to get to the quarterback more, be able to make these stops, because being in this state now where you have a really good NFL football team, and now you want your college football team to be the same way. A lot of times you'll watch one game on Saturday and then turn around on Sunday and you're looking at what the Tennessee Titans are doing, and you're just like, man, we need a big Jeff. We need some guy that's going to be able to disrupt that defensive line and disrupt the offensive line so that you could potentially get an edge rusher into the backfield and be able to get that sack. And I think what Tennessee was really lacking last year is that ability to do it. Also, it would be great if you were able to stop people on third down. I think that was another thing that really annoyed Tennessee Vols fans throughout the football season was, hey, it could be 3rd and 18, but you know how many yards the offense is about to get on this very next play? 18.5 yards. And it happened every single time. And it was extremely frustrating because it happened in the Ole Miss game. And you would see this defense get great stops on 1st and 2nd down and then struggle on 3rd down. And the 3rd down would be the reason why the drive continued for the opposing team. And I think that that's going to be a focus, and it has been a focus for Tennessee over the course of the last 6 or 7 months, because of the fact that they know that even though you had one of the best offenses in the SEC and arguably one of the best offenses in the nations, you also had one of the worst defenses in the SEC. And a lot of times when you're looking at the worst defense going to along with an amazing offense, your defense doesn't have to be one of these defenses where you go in and you become this Alabama team from 2011 where you're only giving up 9 or 10 points a football game. You just don't need to give up 30 a game, because your offense is going to get you 30 points. You just need to average about 20 to 24 points per game on defense, which still means that, hey, you can give up 3 touchdowns and your offense is going to be able to potentially win you the football game still by 10 to 15 or 16 points. That's what I'm really focused on with this, is if this defense can just be about 4 to 5 points better than what they were last season, a 6-7 win season could potentially turn into a 9-10, and depending on which way a football drops here and there, an 11-win football team.
Yeah, and that's where I was headed with that, because right now Tennessee's in that cute stage of, wow, the offense is fun to watch. They're going to compete against South Carolina and Missouri and so forth, but they're going to get stomped in the SEC because you need to play big boy football. You need to come with defense, or otherwise you're just going to be another Mike Leach. Let's throw it 60 times. And I know Heupel's much more of a run game guy, but it's all going to be about offense and warp speed. But what's the substance going to be? So, yeah, the recruiting on defense and really improving the guys that are there from that 21 season is going to be huge, obviously, on that side of the football, and starting to turn some of these 50-50 games, because that division's pretty much outside of Georgia on one end, Vandy on the other end. The other 5 you could throw in a bucket and say, hey, we don't know how this is going to go.
No, and that's what makes this football season extremely interesting, because you have Kentucky and you have somebody like a Will Levis, who is a lot of different NFL scouts are saying is the number 1 quarterback in the next year's NFL draft. And people kind of find it hard to believe, because Tennessee fans remember what he did against them up in Lexington last year. And they're like, how is this guy the number 1 overall prospect going into next year's draft? But then you continue to talk to a lot of scouts and they continue to say, look, no, he has a lot of qualities that you look for in the NFL. And it's very much like he's this year's Kenny Pickett, he's at a weird school. He's not at, Pitt used to be this amazing powerhouse when it comes to football and producing talent for the NFL. But you now look at what they are now, especially in the quarterback position. You're like, well, he's at Pitt. I don't know how good he's actually going to be. And honestly, we still don't know how good he's going to be in the NFL. But then turn around with the Will Levis of, well, he's at Kentucky and he may or may not have some weapons, but but his mechanics are good. So that's what they're looking at. And people automatically want to say, well, Tennessee is going to travel and they're going to take on South Carolina at the end of the year. That's an easy dub. Look, Spencer Rattler could be the quarterback that we thought he was 2 years ago. You just mentioned a few minutes ago about how Hendon Hooker, when he was at Virginia Tech, had an amazing season, and he was playing extremely well there before transferring away. And it's like, wait a second, was he really a find? I mean, you're talking about a guy that played very well up in Blacksburg, and now he comes to your school, and he wasn't even the starting quarterback. Why? Spencer Rattler could be the exact same way with South Carolina. Of maybe this is the Spencer Rattler that could turn into that number 1, number 2 overall prospect, or could turn into that Heisman contender. And then through every bit of that, you still have Florida that's making a significant change with Bill Napier coming in as the head coach. But the good thing about a Florida team, which happens a lot of times, Tennessee gets them very early in the season. They're getting them in Knoxville. It's going to be a couple of weeks after the Pitt game, which a lot of Vols fans are seeing as a revenge game because they believe that they should have won that game last year. And that was when Joe Milton was still the quarterback before he got pulled for Hendon Hooker. So there are those scenarios going into at the very beginning of this schedule. Look, every single fan base is a fanatic at some point in time, and they can go from 0 to 100 extremely quickly. The Tennessee Vols fan base is just waiting for a reason to get excited. They are. You've seen it in baseball with what Vitello has been able to do with that baseball program and them becoming the number 1 team in the nation and the swagger that they brought with them. Yes, it ended up them losing in the super regionals, but the Tennessee fan base grew so much that last year into this year, they're now having to talk about, hey, we need to expand Lindsey Nelson Stadium. You know the history of the basketball programs, both men's and women's basketball, with how excited that the fan base can be because of how good these basketball teams can be. And I am talking about both the men's and the women's basketball teams. This fan base is dying for Tennessee football to be what it was in the 90s and the early 2000s. They are dying for that ability for Neyland Stadium to be what it once was and to be able to make it one of the scariest place and to hear, it's football time in Tennessee and just have the chill bumps run down your arm because you're about to be doing well. This season is shaping up as far as the schedule is concerning for Tennessee to potentially go into LSU being 4-0. We don't know much about LSU this season and how good they're actually going to be. So if Tennessee beats LSU in October and they come back home to take on an Alabama Crimson Tide team in Neyland Stadium being undefeated, it's going to be a very rare opportunity to be like, this is that moment to see which direction your football program is going to go, because you're 5-0. That would be a time where College Game Day is going to be on campus. You're going to have everybody going crazy. It's going to be your 2:30 kickoff on CBS. And next thing you know, if you beat Alabama in Neyland Stadium, you are then going to skyrocket up the polls and skyrocket into people's minds when it comes to the college football playoff, regardless as to the fact that you still have to go to Athens and play the Georgia Bulldogs in November. If they go into the game against Alabama undefeated, this state could explode if they actually beat the Crimson Tide.
I've been around Tennessee football from a distance most of the time for about 7 years in the SEC, where I was there covering it, and I can attest to all that. There's no question about that. Even 20 years after, 15 to 20 years after being, one of those main programs in college football, you see any list when it talks about atmosphere in a stadium, scariest place to play, Neyland Stadium's always near the top of the list. People still know, hey, if the conditions are right, this place is going to be special.
And I think that the part about it that makes me believe that, and the part about Neyland Stadium and the excitement level, is because we did see it last season for the Ole Miss game. And I know that was Lane Kiffin, and I know it was an Ole Miss offense that came in, and it was a very good football team. But I think the part about it is you saw the excitement level from Vols fans that you had not seen in an extremely long time, where it's set up right on the schedule where Tennessee football fans could just focus on the Vols, and every single day was about that game, and every single moment was about that moment. And you saw Vols fans around Nashville, where I am all the time. You saw Tennessee gear everywhere, and again, nothing against Vanderbilt. I know that they're in Nashville, but this is the Tennessee state is a Vol State. And so you saw that level of, flags flying while you're driving down the interstate and all that excitement level that you see when it comes to a program that could be one of the best in the SEC. And I know that it is one of those moments where the Alabama game, which will be that game in Neyland Stadium, if they are 5-0, where you're only one win away and basically like 2 wins away from where your season was last year, and you're playing a team that you haven't beaten in decades, and now you have a smart quarterback, you have a very good offense, and again, if that defense can improve and you can get some pressure on that offensive line and be able to get into the backfield, Neyland Stadium will be rocking on October 15th if they go into that one undefeated. And it'll be a very rare time. We're going to Baton Rouge and then turning around and playing another game will not be a drop-off game for them because of the excitement of going to LSU.
For me, Joe, every offseason, there's about, there's the elite that get all the attention, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia on down the line. But there's always about 3 or 4 teams that intrigue me. And in this offseason, Tennessee is one of those 3 or 4 teams across the nation that I'm like intrigued.
Well, and there's a good reason for that, because the reason, and one of the biggest reasons why I believe that the Tennessee fan base is so focused on this football team is the moment that Arch Manning made his decision and he chose to go to Texas, nobody in Tennessee was upset about it. And it's because they're looking at their team now and they're thinking, you know what, we're putting something together that's very good. Do I think they're one of the top 2 or 3 football teams in the SEC? No, not right now. Do they have that potential? Yes, with a very smart play by Hendon Hooker. And I think that Hendon Hooker is very close to being that Taj Boyd of your Clemsons, where he was the first quarterback that kind of got the system on the right track. And he got Clemson back to being a better football team and on the right direction of a smart quarterback that's not going to turn the football over. And then right after him is when Deshaun Watson came in. And then after Deshaun Watson, then, you did have to go and you had your Trevor Lawrence and that sort of stuff. But at the same time, there had to be that first quarterback that started the process of good quarterbacks coming to your university. At Alabama, you look at it, AJ McCarron was a good quarterback, but if you look at AJ McCarron and you compare him to the last 2 or 3 quarterbacks that Alabama has put on the football field, he's not better than any of them. And I think that there's going to be a potential with Hendon Hooker and the ability that he's had to put this football program in the spotlight with a win against Florida, with a win down in Baton Rouge against LSU, and depending on what happens against Alabama and Georgia, you now have this ability for the quarterback position to be sexy at Tennessee. And that is where you could be looking at a Hendon Hooker being the cornerstone of what Tennessee could be about in the next 5 to 10 football seasons.
Always a great college football conversation with Joe Hunk. Joe, you'll do it better than me. Why don't you just let everyone know where they can find you?
Oh, it's a few places. First, just follow me on Twitter at Joe Hunk, because that's where you're going to get every bit of the information of what all I'm doing. But Monday through Friday, 3HL from 3 to 6 on 104.5 The Zone. Every Thursday night, we've got the Strike Zone, which is going to be at 7 o'clock. We do that from First Horizon Park in Nashville. And then football season comes. It's all about that gamer zone and me not coughing like I just did right now in the middle of me trying to promote myself. So I really appreciate that.
Joe, it's always a good time. You were running all over the place, so we appreciate you stopping for just a second to give us some time.
Hey, I appreciate it, man, always.